Close your eyes and let yourself drift back through the centuries to a time when the Mediterranean world balanced on the edge of empire and decline. The year is 30 BCE, and you find yourself in the sprawling palace complex of Alexandria, where marble corridors echo with whispered secrets and the scent of frankincense mingles with the salt air from the harbor. The sun sets over the great library, casting long shadows across polished floors that have witnessed the footsteps of philosophers, generals, and gods made flesh. You are not a queen, nor a general, nor a scholar poring over papyrus scrolls in lamplight. You are something far more intimate and infinitely more precarious, a handmaiden to Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh of Egypt, the final flame of a dynasty that has ruled for 3 centuries. Your hands know the texture of silk that costs more than most people earn in a lifetime. Your ears have heard state secrets whispered in languages from across the known world. Your eyes have witnessed the careful construction of divinity, layer by careful layer. Each morning in chambers where mortality and godhood blur like watercolors in rain. Your days are measured not in grand political maneuvers or the movement of armies, but in the careful arrangement of oils and unguents, quaint in the precise memorization of which face powder flatters in morning light versus the golden glow of evening shadows. In the delicate navigation of a ruler's moods that could shift as quickly as the wind across the Nile Delta. You live in a world where a misplaced pen could be interpreted as carelessness, where the wrong shade of coal could spell disaster for your family's fortunes, where silence and observation are the currencies that keep you alive. Here, these perfumed chambers where power and beauty intertwine like serpents around a caduceus, you will discover that serving a living goddess demands more than mere devotion. It requires the constant sacrifice of your own comfort, safety, and sometimes your very identity. The woman you serve is brilliant, multilingual, politically astute, and utterly ruthless when necessary. She speaks 9 languages fluently, can discuss philosophy with Alexandrian scholars, and command the loyalty of both Roman generals and Egyptian priests. Yet she is also a woman who requires her morning bath to be precisely the right temperature, who demands that her cosmetics be applied with mathematical precision, and who expects those who serve her to anticipate her needs before she herself realizes them. Tonight, we'll explore what it truly meant to live in the shadow of one of history's most fascinating and dangerous rulers, to be simultaneously invisible and indispensable, to hold secrets that could topple kingdoms while arranging flowers and mixing perfumes. We'll journey through the final, flickering moments of a civilization that had endured for millennia, witnessing its end, not from the perspective of pharaohs and generals, but through the eyes of those who swept the floors, arranged the linens, and kept the intimate machinery of power running smoothly. The first sound you hear each morning is not the call of birds or the gentle lapping of harbor waves, but the soft whisper of bare feet against polished marble as the night servants complete their final tasks before dawn. 8. You rise into pre-dawn darkness, your small chamber adjacent to the queen's apartments, still cool from the desert night. The walls around you are painted with delicate lotus blossoms and papyrus reeds, but these decorations are subtle, understated. You are, after all, merely a servant, albeit one entrusted with the most intimate aspects of divine majesty. Your first duty is to test the water that has been heating throughout the night in bronze vessels tended by slaves whose names you may never learn. The temperature must be precisely warm enough to open the queen's pores for the application of oils, but never so hot as to cause the slightest discomfort to skin that is, according to official proclamation, more precious than gold. You dipped your elbow into the water, a technique learned from generations of servants, feeling for that perfect balance between warmth and heat. It's cool, and the queen's morning ritual is disrupted. It's hot, and you may find yourself facing punishment that ranges from a sharp rebuke to, in extreme cases, reassignment to duties in the palace's less pleasant quarters, as the eastern sky begins to show the faintest hint of pearl gray. You make your way through corridors lined with painted scenes of the queen's divine ancestry. Here, Isis herself is shown bestowing the crown of Egypt upon Cleopatra's brow. There, the god Ptah extends his blessing to the Ptolemaic line. These images serve as constant reminders of the supernatural status of the woman you serve, but they also underscore the terrifying responsibility that rests upon your shoulders. You are not merely dressing a mortal woman. You are participating in the daily creation of a goddess. The queen's private chambers occupy an entire wing of the palace, a sprawling complex of interconnected rooms that includes her sleeping quarters, bathing facilities, wardrobe chambers, and what might be called a laboratory, though that term would not be invented for centuries yet. Here, in rooms that smell perpetually of myrrh, cinnamon, and exotic oils imported from India and Arabia, it's a transformation from Cleopatra the woman to Cleopatra the living embodiment of Chpater. Isis takes place each day with the precision of a religious ceremony. Your hands, after months or years of this work, have become as sensitive as a physician's. You can detect the slightest change in the queen's skin texture, can sense whether she slept well by the way her muscles respond to massage, can read her mood in the set of her shoulders before she speaks a single word. This intimate knowledge is both your greatest asset and your most dangerous burden. To know a queen's body so well is to hold secrets that could destroy kingdoms, yet to fail in your observations could result in selecting the wrong combination of oils or cosmetics, leading to displeasure that reverberates through the entire hierarchy of palace's life. The oil ceremony begins before dawn, in chambers lit by dozens of oil lamps that cast dancing shadows on walls decorated with gold leaf and precious stones. The queen lies upon a couch carved from a single piece of ebony, imported at enormous expense from the interior of Africa. Your hands begin with sweet almond oil, warmed to precisely body temperature, working from her feet upward in long, smooth strokes that follow the lines of muscles and bones. This is not mere luxury, it is statecraft. Queen's skin must be flawless, radiant, otherworldly in its perfection, because every person who sees her must be reminded that they are in the presence of divinity made manifest. The selection of oils varies according to the season, the political climate, and a queen's specific plans for the day. Will she be receiving Roman dignitaries? Then the oil must be scented with frankincense and myrrh, fragrances that connote wealth in the mysterious East. Is she planning to appear before Egyptian priests? Then lotus oil and the subtle scent of papyrus flowers, connecting her to the traditional imagery of Egyptian royalty. Does she intend to meet with merchants and administrators? Then lighter scents that suggest competence and clarity of thought without overwhelming masculine sensibilities. But you must also read the subtler signs. The slight tension in her jaw that indicates she received troubling news the previous evening. The way her breathing changes when she's planning something that involves considerable risk. The barely perceptible shift in her posture that suggests she's entertaining thoughts of her Roman lovers Julius Caesar in years past. Now, Marcus Antonius, whose passion for her has become a political liability that grows more dangerous with each passing month. As you work, applying layers of different oils with practiced efficiency, the queen sometimes speaks. Not to you, precisely, but in your presence, which is almost the same thing. You hear fragments of conversations she's rehearsing for later in the day, snippets of poetry she's composing, occasionally bitter observations about the political situation that grows more precarious with each report from Rome. You learn to listen without appearing to hear, to remember without seeming to retain, to be present without truly existing in her consciousness, except as an extension of her own will. The cosmetics ritual follows the oils. And here your training becomes most crucial. The queen's face is her greatest weapon, more powerful than any army, more persuasive than any treasury. The application of kohl around her eyes is not merely decorative, but symbolic, connecting her to the goddess Hathor and emphasizing the hypnotic quality of her gaze that has allegedly reduced hardened Roman generals to stammering boys. The kohl itself is made from antimony and galena, ground to an impossibly fine powder and mixed with oils that have been blessed by priests in ceremonies. You are not permitted to witness. The process of applying eye makeup alone can take nearly an hour. Each line must be perfectly straight, perfectly symmetrical, standing from the inner corner of each eye to the temple in a way that subtly alters the apparent shape of her face. The upper lid receives a different treatment than the lower, with graduated shades that create depth and mystery. Gold dust, obtained at prices that could feed entire villages, is applied sparingly to catch and reflect lamplight, making her eyes appear to glow within a fire. Her lips require equal attention. The base color is achieved through a mixture of red, ochre, and animal fat, but the final effect comes from the addition of powdered pearls that give her mouth an otherworldly luminescence. The shape is enhanced, made slightly fuller than nature, provided following artistic conventions that have been refined over centuries. You have learned to work with brushes made from the finest animal hair, tools so delicate that a single clumsy movement could result in disaster. But perhaps the most challenging aspect of your daily duties involves the creatures that give this segment its name, the serpents. Cleopatra's association with snakes is not merely symbolic or mythological. She maintains several live specimens for various purposes, both practical and theatrical. The queen's private chambers include a specially constructed enclosure where different species of serpents are kept under carefully controlled conditions. Some more venomous, maintained for the extraction of poisons used in both medicine and occasionally more sinister applications. Others are harmless but impressively large, used for ceremonial purposes and to reinforce her identification with the goddess Isis, who was often depicted with serpent companions. Your responsibilities include feeding these creatures, maintaining their living conditions, and most unnervingly, handling them when the queen requires their presence for meetings or ceremonies. You have learned to read the subtle signs that indicate a snake's mood, to move with the slow, confident gestures that prevent triggering their defensive instincts, to maintain the proper temperature and humidity in their enclosures. This knowledge was not acquired through formal training, but through trial and error, with the understanding that errors in this domain could prove fatal. The most prized of these creatures is an Egyptian cobra, a magnificent specimen nearly 6 feet in length, whose hood displays the traditional markings that connect it to the uraeus, the protective serpent symbol of pharaonic power. This particular snake has been with the queen for several years, and she has developed an almost supernatural rapport with it. You have witnessed her allow it to coil around her arm during private ceremonies, have seen her speak to it in ancient Egyptian phrases that predate even the Ptolemaic conquest of Egypt. Caring for this cobra requires extraordinary attention to detail. Its food must be fresh and precisely sized small mammals that you must personally select and sometimes kill. Its water must be changed daily, filtered through papyrus to remove impurities. The temperature of its enclosure must be monitored throughout the day and night, adjusted according to the changing seasons and weather patterns. Most challenging of all, you must be able to handle the creature safely when it is required for the queen's use, approaching it with the confidence of a priestess while maintaining the practical caution that keeps you alive. The other serpents present their own challenges. A collection of smaller species used for venom extraction requires different handling techniques and feeding schedules. Several non-venomous constrictors, impressive in size and markings, are used primarily for ceremonial display, but must be kept in peak condition, their scales gleaming with health, their movements fluid and hypnotic. You have learned to read the subtle signs of illness or distress in creatures that cannot vocalize their discomfort. Understanding that the queen's displeasure at a subpar serpent display could have consequences extending far beyond your personal welfare. The extraction of venom is perhaps the most dangerous of your regular duties. Working with tiny bronze tools under the queen's direct supervision, you must capture the venom as it flows from the serpent's fangs into specially prepared vessels. This substance has multiple uses. Diluted versions serve as components in certain cosmetics, creating subtle effects that enhance the queen's already considerable natural beauty. Concentrated preparations are used in medicines that the queen personally distributes to favored courtiers and allies, and the most potent extractions are stored in sealed containers for purposes that you prefer not to contemplate too deeply. The queen's fascination with poisons extends beyond mere political utility. She has made extensive studies of toxicology, consulting with physicians and scholars from across the Mediterranean world. You have witnessed experiments conducted on condemned prisoners, carefully documented observations of different substances, effects, detailed recordings of symptoms and timelines. Your role in these activities is primarily as an assistant and observer, but the knowledge you have inadvertently acquired makes you exceptionally dangerous to anyone who might wish you harm, and exceptionally valuable to the queen who trusts you with such secrets between the morning cosmetics ritual and the evening's removal process. Your day is filled with 100 smaller tasks that require equal precision and discretion. You maintain the queen's extensive wardrobe, ensuring that silk garments are properly aired and stored, that gold jewelry is polished to perfection, that the complex mechanisms of certain ceremonial headdresses function smoothly. You prepare the various unguents and perfumes that the queen applies throughout the day, mixing ingredients according to formulas that have been passed down through generations of palace servants, modified according to the queen's personal preferences and the political requirements of particular occasions. You also serve as an unofficial intelligence gatherer, though this role is never explicitly acknowledged, as you move through the palace corridors on various errands. You overhear conversations between courtiers, serve the body language of visiting dignitaries, note which servants appear nervous and which seem confident. All of this information is filed away in your memory to be reported to the queen during the quiet moments of the daily grooming rituals. She never asks directly for such intelligence, but she has trained you to volunteer observations through subtle questioning and the careful creation of opportunities for you to speak. The evening ritual reverses the morning's process but requires equal care and attention. The removal of cosmetics must be accomplished without damaging the queen's skin. Using oils and unguents specifically formulated for this purpose, the jewelry and clothing must be cataloged and properly stored. The queen's hair, which may have been arranged in elaborate styles requiring hours of work, must be carefully combed out and treated with nourishing oils before she retires. But it is during these evening hours that you are most likely to overhear the conversations and witness the interactions that make your position so precarious. The queen receives her most trusted advisors in her private chambers, discusses matters of state while you work silently in the background, sometimes speaks with startling frankness about her relationships with Julius Caesar and Marcus Antonius. You learn which Egyptian nobles can be trusted and which are selling information to Rome. You'll discover which Roman senators are secretly negotiating with Octavian while publicly supporting Antonius. You witness the queen's private moments of doubt and fear, carefully hidden from all other observers. This knowledge is a constant weight upon your shoulders. You understand that your continued survival depends not only on your competence in the practical aspects of your duties, but also on your ability to forget everything you have learned while somehow retaining enough knowledge to serve effectively. It is a paradox that defines the existence of those who serve in the innermost circles of power. To be useful, you must know everything. To survive, you must remember nothing. As the weeks turn to months in service to the queen, you begin to understand that her private chambers function as something far more complex than mere living quarters. They constitute a carefully designed instrument of statecraft, every element calculated to produce specific psychological effects on visitors, while serving the practical needs of maintaining power in an increasingly dangerous world. Your role extends far beyond that of a simple servant. You have become a curator of illusion, a guardian of secrets, and an unwitting participant in the delicate choreography of international diplomacy. The Queen's bathing chamber serves as, perhaps, the most potent example of how luxury and politics intertwine in ways that would be invisible to casual observers. The bath itself is carved from a single block of porphyry, a purple stone so rare and expensive that its very existence in the palace sends a message about Egyptian wealth to anyone permitted to see it. The water that fills this extraordinary vessel is not drawn from common wells, but carried in daily from sacred springs in the Nile Delta, transported in sealed amphorae to preserve its ritual purity. Your responsibility includes testing this water for temperature, clarity, and what the Queen calls its spiritual essence, a quality they have learned to assess through subtle indicators that would seem mystical to outsiders, but represent practical knowledge accumulated through months of careful observation. The timing of the Queen's baths is carefully orchestrated to coincide with specific political objectives. When she prepares to receive Roman senators or military commanders, the bathing ritual takes place shortly before their arrival, ensuring that her skin carries the subtle fragrance of exotic oils and that her entire being radiates the kind of otherworldly perfection that reinforces her claims to divine status. You have learned to recognize the different combinations of oils and unguents required for different categories of visitors. Lighter, more subtle fragrances for Egyptian priests who might be offended by excessive luxury. Richer, more complex scents for foreign dignitaries who expect displays of wealth, in specific combinations that the Queen believes enhance her natural pheromones when she needs to employ, which she frankly calls her carnal diplomacy. The process of preparing these baths requires knowledge that extends far beyond simple mixing of ingredients. You must understand the chemical properties of different oils, how they interact with various types of water, how temperature affects their potency and longevity. You have learned to create layered effects where initial scents give way to subtler fragrances as the oils warm against the Queen's skin, producing an olfactory experience that evolves throughout the duration of a diplomatic meeting. The Queen has taught you that scent memory is among the most powerful forms of human recollection, and that a Roman general who associates her presence with a particular combination of frankincense and myrrh will find his thoughts returning to her long after he has departed Alexandria. But the most challenging aspect of bath preparation involves the living elements that the Queen sometimes incorporates into her ablutions. On certain ceremonial occasions, she bathes in water that contains carefully selected marine creatures, small, harmless fish whose scales catch the light and create the impression that the Queen's skin itself is somehow luminous or tiny, aquatic. Plants that release subtle fragrances when disturbed by movement. These creatures must be captured alive, transported carefully to prevent damage, and maintained in perfect health until the moment they are needed. Their care requires specialized knowledge that you have acquired through trial and error, learning to recognize signs of distress in species that most people would never encounter, understanding the precise water conditions and feeding requirements that keep them in peak condition. The Queen's wardrobe represents another dimension of your responsibilities that extends far beyond simple clothing management. Each garment in her collection has been selected not merely for its beauty, but for its political significance, its cultural associations, and its practical utility in specific diplomatic situations. Her Egyptian ceremonial robes, woven with gold thread and decorated with hieroglyphic inscriptions, serve to remind Egyptian subjects of her connection to pharaonic tradition, while simultaneously impressing foreign visitors with displays of wealth that few other rulers can match. Her Roman-style stolas and palace, cut and decorated according to the latest fashions from the capital, to demonstrate her sophistication and cultural adaptability to visitors from the West, while subtly suggesting that she could serve as an appropriate partner for Roman leaders. But the most remarkable garments in her collection are those designed for what she calls transformation occasions, meetings where she needs to embody specific mythological or historical figures for maximum psychological impact. You have helped dress her as Isis, complete with elaborate headdresses that incorporate live serpents and jewelry that transforms her movements into religious gestures. You have prepared her to appear as Aphrodite with garments so sheer and perfectly fitted that she seems to emerge from classical sculpture, her skin enhanced with powdered gold, and her hair arranged in styles copied from Greek artistic masterpieces. Most memorably, you have participated in her preparation to meet Julius Caesar, while dressed as a representation of Egypt itself. Her clothing literally incorporating miniature maps worked in silk and gold thread, her jewelry featuring precious stones from every region of her kingdom. The selection of jewelry for different occasions requires understanding that extends into the realms of psychology, mythology, and practical politics. The Queen maintains collections organized not by monetary value, but by the specific messages different pieces communicate to different audiences. Her Egyptian pieces, many inherited from previous pharaohs, connect her to dynastic tradition and religious authority. Her Greek jewelry, commissioned from the finest craftsmen in Alexandria, demonstrates the cultural sophistication of Ptolemaic rule. Her Roman acquisitions, gifts from Julius Caesar and Marcus Antonius, serve as visible proof of her relationships with the most powerful men in the world, while simultaneously suggesting that Roman leaders consider her worthy of their most precious offerings. You have learned to read the subtle psychological effects that different jewelry combinations produce on the Queen herself. Certain pieces, particularly those with strong historical associations, seem to alter her posture and speaking patterns, connecting her to the personalities of previous wearers in ways that enhance her natural charisma. Other pieces appear to provide her with confidence in specific diplomatic situations and talismans whose power may be entirely psychological, but whose effects on her performance are undeniably real. Your role includes not only maintaining these pieces in perfect condition, but also observing their effects on the Queen's behavior and recommending combinations that enhance her effectiveness in particular circumstances. The Queen's hair presents perhaps the most complex challenge in your daily routine, requiring skills that combine artistry, engineering, and cultural anthropology. Her natural hair, thick and dark, with an almost blue-black sheen, serves as the foundation for elaborate constructions that can take hours to complete and must remain perfectly intact throughout long diplomatic sessions. The basic techniques you employ were developed by Greek hairdressers over centuries of refinement, but the Queen has demanded modifications that incorporate Egyptian symbolic elements and Roman fashion trends, creating hybrid styles that reinforce her image as a ruler who transcends cultural boundaries. The most elaborate of these hairstyles require structural support systems made from carefully shaped wire armatures that distribute weight evenly across her skull while remaining completely invisible to observers. These frameworks, crafted by palace metalworkers according to your specifications, must be custom fitted to accommodate different ceremonial headdresses while providing anchor points for the complex arrangements of braids, curls, and decorative elements that create the final effect. You have learned to work with hairpieces made from the finest quality human hair, purchased at enormous expense from regions throughout the Mediterranean world, selected for exact color matches and texture compatibility with the Queen's natural hair. The symbolic content embedded in these hairstyles communicates complex messages to informed observers, while appearing simply beautiful to casual viewers. Certain braid patterns invoke Egyptian religious imagery, connecting the Queen to goddess iconography that resonates with native subjects. Other arrangements follow Greek mathematical principles, creating visual harmonies that appeal to Alexandrian intellectuals and reinforce perceptions of the queen as a philosopher-ruler. Roman fluent styles suggest cultural flexibility and political sophistication, while maintaining enough exotic elements to preserve her mystique as an Eastern queen. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of your service involves what might be called the Queen's intelligence apparatus, the informal network of observation and information gathering that operates through the supposedly private spaces of her personal routine. The Queen has trained you to serve as her eyes and ears throughout the palace complex, gathering information through careful observation of other servants, strategic positioning during supposedly private conversations, and the cultivation of relationships with key figures in the palace hierarchy. This intelligence work requires skills that were never part of any formal training, but have developed through necessity and the Queen's patient instruction. You have learned to read body language with almost supernatural accuracy, detecting signs of deception, fear, attraction, and hidden knowledge in the postures and gestures of everyone from visiting dignitaries to kitchen servants. You can identify regional accents that reveal the true origins of people claiming to be from different locations. Spot jewelry and clothing details that indicate wealth levels and political affiliations. Recognize the subtle signs that suggest someone is carrying weapons or concealed messages. The Queen expects you to report these observations during the quiet moments of the daily grooming routine, but your reports must be delivered in ways that appear casual and conversational rather than formal intelligence briefings. You have developed a private vocabulary of subtle gestures and coded phrases that allow you to communicate complex information while appearing to discuss mundane details of wardrobe or cosmetics. The Queen's responses to this intelligence often influence her choices of clothing, jewelry, and even fragrance for upcoming meetings, as she adapts her presentation to exploit psychological advantages revealed through your observations. The most delicate aspect of this intelligence work involves monitoring the loyalty and reliability of other palace servants. The Queen's survival depends not only on her own skills and the protection of her guards, but also on maintaining the absolute discretion of everyone who has access to her private spaces. You have learned to identify servants who seem overly curious about matters beyond their responsibilities, who ask questions that suggest they are reporting to outside parties, or who display wealth or knowledge that cannot be explained by their official duties and wages when such concerns arise. Your observations are reported through the same casual communication methods used for other intelligence, but the consequences extend far beyond simple political maneuvering. Servants suspected of disloyalty may find themselves reassigned to distant parts of the palace, sent on lengthy errands to remote locations, or, in extreme cases, simply disappearing from the palace complex altogether. You understand that your own survival depends not only on maintaining the Queen's trust, but also on ensuring that no other servant perceives you as a threat to their own security or advancement. The emotional toll of this constant vigilance and the weight of accumulated secrets creates an isolation that is perhaps the greatest burden of your position. You cannot form genuine friendships with other servants, since any relationship might be viewed with suspicion by the Queen or exploited by hostile parties seeking information about her private life. You cannot confide your fears or concerns to anyone, since the Queen's security depends on maintaining perfect discretion about all aspects of her daily routine. You exist in a state of permanent performance, where every word and gesture must be calculated for its potential consequences, where genuine spontaneity becomes a luxury you cannot afford. Yet there are moments, usually during the quiet evening, hours when the Queen prepares for sleep, when the barriers between servant and confidant become almost transparent. She sometimes speaks of her childhood, of the weight of expectations that have shaped her entire existence, of her fears about the political situation that grows more dangerous with each passing month. In these moments, you glimpse the woman behind the goddess, okay? The mortal human being who must somehow embody the hopes and fears of an entire quest civilization while navigating personal relationships with men whose political interests may ultimately conflict with her survival. These glimpses of vulnerability make your position even more complex, since they create emotional bonds that complicate the practical aspects of your service. You begin to care about the queen, not merely as an employer whose favor ensures your survival, but as a person whose burdens and fears mirror your own in surprising ways. This emotional investment makes your intelligence work more effective, since genuine concern motivates more careful observation and analysis. But it also makes the constant deception and vigilance more psychologically exhausting. The deeper you become embedded in the queen's daily routine, the more you understand that survival in this rarefied atmosphere requires mastering skills that have no names and learning rules that are never explicitly stated. Your education in palace politics begins with small observations, the way certain courtiers' eyes never quite meet the queen's gaze, the subtle changes in posture that ripple through a room when particular names are mentioned, the careful choreography of who speaks first, who remains silent, and who exits at precisely the right moment to avoid witnessing conversations that could prove dangerous to remember. Your position grants you access to information that could destabilize governments. Yet, your survival depends on processing this knowledge without appearing to understand its significance. You develop what might be called selective comprehension, the ability to hear conversations in languages you understand while maintaining the expression of someone who speaks only Egyptian, to witness interactions whose implications you grasp completely while displaying the blank attention of a servant focused solely on immediate tasks. This performance requires constant mental discipline, since a moment's lapse in concentration could result in facial expressions or body language that betrays your actual level of understanding. The queen herself serves as your teacher in these subtle arts, though her instruction comes through example and correction rather than explicit lessons. She demonstrates how to position yourself during sensitive conversations so that you appear focused on your duties while actively maintaining optimal positions for observation. She shows you how to time your movements around the chamber so that you're present for crucial exchanges, but absent during moments when your presence might inhibit frank discussion. Most importantly, she teaches you to recognize the difference between information she wants you to overhear and conversations where your genuine ignorance serves her interests better than your knowledge. The management of the queen's correspondence represents one of your most delicate responsibilities, acquiring skills that combine literacy, cryptography, and psychological analysis. Letters arrive daily from across the Mediterranean world, written in multiple languages and scripts, many employing codes and references that require specialized knowledge to interpret. Your role includes not only the physical handling of these documents, ensuring they remain pristine, organizing them according to priority and sensitivity, preparing writing materials when the queen composes responses, but also serving as an additional layer of security in the communication process. You learn to recognize the handwriting of frequent correspondence, to identify the materials and techniques that indicate a letter's origin and authenticity, to spot the subtle signs that suggest a document has been copied or altered during transmission. The queen teaches you to examine seals and closures for evidence of tampering, to test inks and papers for consistency with their claimed origins, to recognize the linguistic patterns that distinguish genuine communications from clever forgeries designed to mislead or entrap her. The most sensitive correspondences require special handling procedures that transform routine document management into elaborate security protocols. Letters from Marcus Antonius arrive through channels so secret that even you don't know the complete delivery route, often concealed within seemingly innocent shipments of trade goods or disguised as routine administrative communications. These messages frequently employ codes based on shared memories and private jokes, references that would be meaningless to interceptors but carry profound significance for the intended recipients. Your responsibility includes maintaining the materials and references necessary for encoding and decoding these messages, special inks that become visible only when heated. Papers treated with chemicals that reveal hidden text when exposed to specific solutions. Reference books whose margins contain cipher keys disguised as scholarly annotations. The Queen has trained you to prepare these materials according to precise specifications, understanding that errors in their composition could render crucial communications unintelligible or, worse, expose their hidden content to hostile parties. But perhaps the most challenging aspect of correspondence management involves what the Queen calls strategic misdirection, the creation and maintenance of false communications designed to confuse potential enemies and protect genuine intelligence. You participate in the composition of letters that appear to contain sensitive information but actually convey misleading data. Drafts of messages that are deliberately allowed to be intercepted by hostile agents, and entire fictional correspondences designed to support cover stories about the Queen's activities and intentions. This work requires understanding the psychology of different potential interceptors, crafting deceptions that will be believable to Roman senators but unconvincing to Egyptian priests, or vice versa. You learn to write in styles that mimic the Queen's genuine voice while subtly incorporating information designed to mislead specific audiences. The emotional strain of this constant deception affects even your private thoughts. As you find yourself questioning the authenticity of your own perceptions and memories when surrounded by so many layers of carefully constructed falsehood, the Queen's relationship with her various serpents reveals another dimension of palace life that outsiders would find difficult to comprehend. These creatures serve functions that extend far beyond simple symbolism or theatrical display, operating as living components in a complex system of communication, security, and psychological manipulation. You discovered that different species are employed for different purposes, each requiring specialized knowledge, and handling techniques that you must master to maintain your effectiveness as a servant. The Egyptian cobra that serves as the Queen's primary ceremonial companion possesses intelligence that sometimes seems almost supernatural. You observe it responding to vocal commands spoken in ancient Egyptian, displaying behavior that suggests it recognizes different individuals and their relative status within the palace hierarchy. The Queen claims that this particular serpent can detect deception and hostility in visitors, coiling more tightly around her arm when she meets with people whose loyalty she questions, remaining relaxed and calm in the presence of those she trusts. Whether this behavior results from genuine mystical abilities or simply the cobra's sensitivity to subtle changes in the Queen's own body chemistry and demeanor, its effects on visitors are undeniably powerful. Roman senators who pride themselves on their rationality and skepticism find themselves unnerved by the creature's apparent assessment of their character, often revealing more information than they intended in their eagerness to demonstrate their harmlessness and good intentions. Your daily care of this remarkable creature requires understanding its behavioral patterns, dietary preferences, and environmental needs with scientific precision. You monitor its shedding cycles, adjusting its habitat to accommodate the vulnerabilities that accompany the replacement of its skin. You manage its feeding schedule to ensure peak alertness during important meetings, while avoiding the lethargy that follows large meals. Most delicately, you must handle the cobra during its periodic episodes of aggression, understanding when to maintain respectful distance and when direct intervention becomes necessary for the safety of everyone in the vicinity. The smaller, venomous species in the Queen's collection serve more specialized functions, their care requiring knowledge that borders on the alchemical. You learn to extract venom in precise quantities, understanding how environmental factors affect its potency, mastering Techniques for preserving and concentrating the active compounds for various applications. The queen employs these substances in preparations that range from cosmetics designed to create subtle, tingling sensations that enhance her natural beauty to medicines that can cure certain ailments or, in different concentrations, produce more permanent effects. The preparation of these substances requires laboratory skills that you acquire through careful observation and patient practice. You learn to work with glass apparatus imported from Syrian craftsmen, bronze tools forged by palace metalworkers, measuring devices calibrated to standards maintained by the library's scholars. The queen oversees your education in these techniques with the same attention she devotes to matters of state, understanding that your competence in these areas directly affects her safety and effectiveness. But the most unsettling aspect of this work involves the testing procedures that ensure the safety and efficacy of different preparations. The queen maintains a supply of condemned criminals and captured enemies who serve as subjects for experiments designed to verify dosages, test new formulations, and explore the potential applications of different compounds. Your role in these activities begins as simple observation and record keeping, but gradually expands to include more active participation as your knowledge and reliability increase. You learn to document symptoms with clinical precision, recording timelines and progressions that inform future applications. You assist in the preparation of different test dosages, understanding how body weight, age, and health status affect individual responses to various substances. Most disturbing, you participate in the disposal of evidence and the management of information about these experiments, ensuring that knowledge of the queen's research remains confined to the smallest possible circle of trusted individuals. The psychological toll of this work compounds the isolation that already defines your existence within the palace. You cannot discuss your experiences with other servants, since knowledge of the queen's more lethal capabilities must remain secret. You cannot seek comfort or advice from anyone outside the palace, since your entire identity has become inextricably linked to your role as the queen's most trusted servant. Even your dreams become contaminated by the images and knowledge you accumulate during your waking hours, creating a cycle of psychological stress that has no outlet or resolution. Yet these darker aspects of your service are balanced by moments of genuine wonder and privilege that few people in the ancient world ever experience. You witness the queen's intellectual prowess as she debates philosophy with visiting scholars, switching effortlessly between languages and demonstrating knowledge that rivals the finest minds of her generation. You observe her artistic sensibilities as she collaborates with painters and sculptors on works that will outlast the political crises of her lifetime. You participate in ceremonies that connect her to religious traditions stretching back thousands of years, rituals whose beauty and power transcend the practical politics that teach to make most of her daily activities. The queen's personal library, housed within her private chambers, contains texts that represent the accumulated wisdom of multiple civilizations. Your duties include maintaining these precious documents, ensuring proper storage conditions that preserve fragile papyrus and delicate bindings, organizing materials according to the queen's research interests and current projects. You learn to read multiple scripts in languages through necessity, developing skills that transform you from a simple servant into something approaching a scholar in your own right. Access to this library reveals the breadth of the queen's intellectual curiosity and the depth of her preparation for the challenges she faces. You discover treatises on military strategy written by Alexander's generals, philosophical works by Alexandrian scholars, scientific texts that explore everything from astronomy to medicine to engineering. The queen reads voraciously, often late into the night, synthesizing information from multiple sources to develop strategies for dealing with contemporary problems. The first signs that the world you have known is approaching its end arrive not through official proclamations or dramatic announcements, but through subtle changes in the rhythm of palace's life that only those intimately familiar with its patterns would notice. The queen's morning routine begins to include longer periods of silence. Moments when she stares at her reflection with an expression that suggests she is seeing not her present self, but some future version. Its fate has already been determined. The oils you apply to her skin seem to absorb less readily, as if her body has begun to reject the very substances that have maintained her otherworldly perfection for so many years. Marcus Antonius arrives at the palace in the early autumn of what will prove to be the final year of Ptolemaic rule. But his appearance shocks those who remember the confident Roman general who first came to Alexandria as the queen's lover and political ally. The man who enters the queen's chambers moves with the careful gait of someone whose body has been ravaged by months of defeat and retreat, his skin bearing the pallor of someone who has watched his dreams of empire crumble into dust and blood. His eyes, once bright with ambition and desire, now carry the haunted expression of a commander. Ko has led too many men to their deaths and witnessed the destruction of too many cities whose names will never be remembered by history. Your position requires you to maintain the same level of service and discretion, despite the obvious deterioration in both the political situation and the physical condition of the queen's most important ally. You continue to prepare the ceremonial chambers for their private meetings. But the atmosphere during these sessions has changed from passionate strategy sessions to something that resembles a prolonged funeral wake. The queen and Antonius speak in hushed tones about naval battles lost to Octavian's forces, about Egyptian garrisons that have surrendered without fighting, about the steady erosion of support among allies who once proclaimed their eternal loyalty. The intelligence that reaches the palace through various channels paints an increasingly grim picture of military realities that no amount of diplomatic maneuvering can alter. Octavian's forces control the sea routes that connect Egypt to the rest of the Mediterranean world, cutting off the supplies and reinforcements that would be necessary for any effective resistance. More devastating still, reports arrive daily of Egyptian nobles and military commanders who have begun secret negotiations with Roman representatives, offering their submission in exchange for guarantees of personal safety and the preservation of their wealth. Your duties expand to include the management of an increasingly frantic correspondence as the queen attempts to rally support from remaining allies and explore diplomatic solutions that might preserve some vestige of Egyptian independence. Letters arrive from rulers across the known world, most offering carefully worded expressions of sympathy while avoiding any concrete commitments of military assistance. The queen dictates responses that demonstrate her continued hope for a political solution. But you observed the growing desperation in her voice as she searches for phrases that might persuade distant allies to risk their own security for a cause that appears increasingly hopeless. The physical preparations for potential siege become another aspect of your responsibilities as the palace staff begins the grim process of preparing for a conflict that everyone hopes to avoid, but few believe can be prevented. You participate in the inventory and storage of food supplies, the concealment of valuables that might be needed for bribes or escape funds, the preparation of secure communication routes that could maintain contact with the outside world if the palace becomes surrounded. The queen's serpent collection requires special attention during these preparations. Some of the creatures must be relocated to more secure quarters, while others are prepared for potential uses that you prefer not to contemplate too specifically. The queen's daily routine adapts to accommodate the new realities of siege preparation while maintaining the appearances of normalcy that she believes are essential for preserving morale among her remaining supporters. Her morning cosmetics ritual becomes even more elaborate, as if the perfection of her appearance could somehow compensate for the deterioration of her political position. She spends increasing amounts of time in consultation with her Egyptian priests, seeking spiritual guidance and participating in ceremonies designed to invoke divine protection for the kingdom and its ruler. But it is during the quiet evening hours. When the day's crises have been temporarily resolved and the palace settles into the rhythm of night watch routines, that the queen's private conversations revealed the true extent of her understanding about the catastrophe that approaches. She speaks with startling frankness about the calculations that will determine Octavian's treatment of captured enemies, Cade, about the political necessity that will require the elimination of potential threats to Roman security, about the likelihood that neither she nor Antonius will be permitted to survive defeat in any recognizable form. These conversations take place while you perform the evening ritual of removing the day's cosmetics and preparing the queen for sleep. Your hands moving with practiced efficiency while your mind struggles to process the implications of what you are hearing. Queen discusses potential escape routes with the same calm, analytical approach she once applied to diplomatic strategies, evaluating the practicality of fleeing to distant kingdoms versus the political advantages of remaining in Alexandria to face whatever consequences await her. She considers the fate of her children with a mother's concern, tempered by her rulers, understanding that their survival may depend on their ability to distance themselves from their parents. Political legacy: the arrival of increasingly desperate messengers from Antonius's remaining forces provides a constant reminder of the military situation that deteriorates with each passing day. These men, often wounded and exhausted from journeys across hostile territory, bring reports of battles fought against overwhelming odds, of strategic retreats that have become simple flights from superior enemy forces, of the gradual dissolution of what was once a formidable military alliance. The queen receives these messengers in private audiences, where you serve refreshments and tend to their injuries while listening to accounts of defeat that grow more comprehensive with each new arrival. The psychological toll of this constant stream of bad news affects everyone in the palace, creating an atmosphere of barely controlled panic that permeates even the most routine daily activities. Servants who once moved with confident efficiency now jump at unexpected sounds, their faces bearing expressions of people who understand that their own survival depends entirely on events beyond their control or influence. The queen's personal guards maintain their professional demeanor, but you observe the subtle signs of stress in their posture and movements, the way their eyes constantly scan for potential threats, the frequency with which they check their weapons and escape routes. Your own emotional state during this period swings between terror and a strange kind of exhilaration that comes from witnessing historical events of profound significance. You understand that you are present for the end of a dynasty that has ruled Egypt for 3 centuries, watching the final act of a drama that began when Alexander the Great's general Ptolemy first claimed the kingdom as his inheritance. The knowledge that future historians will debate the events you are witnessing firsthand creates a sense of privilege that coexists uncomfortably with the very real possibility that you may not survive to share your observations with anyone. Dawn of what will prove to be Cleopatra's final day arrives with an eerie stillness that seems to muffle even the ordinary sounds of palace life. The usual bustle of servants preparing for the day's activities has been replaced by a hushed efficiency, as if everyone understands that they are participating in ceremonies that require the solemnity of religious observance. You rise in the pre-dawn darkness to find that the queen has already awakened and spent hours in private prayer before the altar in her chambers, her silhouette barely visible in the flickering light of oil lamps that have burned throughout the night. The news that Marcus Antonius has taken his own life reaches the palace through a messenger who arrives bearing the blood-stained cloak that the Roman general wore during his final moments. The young man who delivers this tragic confirmation trembles as he recounts the details of Antonius's death, describing how the defeated commander fell upon his sword rather than face capture by Octavian's forces. How his final words expressed regret for the destruction his ambitions had brought upon Egypt and his queen. The messenger's voice breaks as he explains that Antonius lived long enough to send a final message of love and apology, asking that Cleopatra remember him not as the cause of her kingdom's downfall, but as a man who genuinely believed their partnership could reshape the Mediterranean world. The queen receives this devastating news with a composure that seems to transcend human emotion, her face maintaining the serene expression of a marble statue, while her hands perform the automatic gestures of accepting the cloak and dismissing the messenger with appropriate gratitude. Only you, standing close enough to observe the subtle signs that reveal her inner state, notice the slight tremor in her fingers as she touches the blood-stained fabric, the almost imperceptible change in her breathing pattern that indicates the enormous effort required to maintain her public dignity in this moment of private anguish. The hours that followed this confirmation of Antonius's death are devoted to preparations that combine the practical necessities of approaching suicide with the ceremonial requirements of a pharaoh's final acts. The queen's requests for specific items and substances take on new urgency. She assembles the materials necessary for what she has clearly decided will be a death that reinforces rather than undermines the mythological associations that have defined her public persona. You assist in gathering the cosmetics, jewelry, and clothing that will transform her suicide into a final performance of the divine majesty that has sustained her reign for nearly 2 decades. The selection of the serpent that will serve as the instrument of her death requires careful consideration of both practical and symbolic factors. The Egyptian cobra that has been her closest companion among the palace serpents possesses the appropriate cultural associations with pharaonic power and the goddess Isis, while its venom provides the relatively quick and dignified death that she seeks. You participate in the final preparations for this remarkable creature, showing that it remains calm and responsive to the queen's handling, while understanding that you are essentially preparing the instrument of your beloved mistress's destruction. The process of testing the cobra's condition and responsiveness takes place in the same chamber where you have performed countless morning cosmetics rituals, but the atmosphere now carries the weight of finality that transforms familiar actions into sacred ceremonies. The queen speaks to the serpent in the ancient Egyptian phrases that have always seemed to calm its natural aggression, allowing it to coil around harm with the fluid grace that has impressed visiting dignitaries and reinforced her identification with Egyptian religious imagery. You observe this interaction with a mixture of professional interest and personal grief. It's understanding that you are witnessing the rehearsal for a scene that will conclude with the end of everything you have known and served. The queen's final correspondence includes letters to Octavian that attempt to negotiate terms for her burial and the treatment of her surviving children, communications that reveal her understanding of Roman political necessities while appealing to whatever honorable instincts the victorious general might possess. She dictates these messages with careful attention to tone and phrasing, seeking language that acknowledges her defeat without surrendering the dignity that has defined her reign. Your role includes preparing the writing materials and assisting with the complex encryption that she hopes will prevent the interception of messages whose content could be used against her family members who have already fled to distant kingdoms. But perhaps the most poignant of her final communications are the personal letters addressed to friends and family members who have shared her journey from the heights of power to this moment of absolute defeat. These messages, written in her own hand rather than dictated to scribes, reveal the private thoughts and emotions that she has carefully concealed from public view throughout the crisis. She writes to her children with a mother's love tempered by a ruler's understanding that their survival may depend on their ability to distance themselves from their parents' political legacy, offering advice and expressing hopes for their futures while carefully avoiding any statements that could be interpreted as criticism of the Roman forces that will determine their fates. The final hours of preparation involve the arrangement of the queen's private chambers to create a setting that will reinforce the mythological and religious significance of her chosen death. The furniture is rearranged according to patterns that evoke Egyptian religious ceremonies. With the couchware, she will die positioned to face east toward the rising sun that has always symbolized rebirth and eternal life in Egyptian spiritual traditions. The walls are decorated with fresh flowers and burning incense that creates an atmosphere of religious solemnity while helping to mask any unpleasant odors that might accompany the physical process of death. Your participation in these arrangements requires emotional detachment that becomes increasingly difficult to maintain as the reality of the approaching end penetrates even the professional focus that has sustained you throughout the crisis. You find yourself memorizing details of the Queen's appearance and behavior during these final hours, understanding that you are among the last people who will witness her alive, and that your observations may eventually contribute to the historical record of these momentous events. The weight of this responsibility adds another layer of stress to an already overwhelming emotional burden, as you struggle to balance personal grief with the requirements of your service. The application of the Queen's final cosmetics becomes a ritual that transcends mere beautification, transforming her mortal features into a mask of divine perfection that will preserve her dignity even in death. You work with unprecedented care and attention to detail, understanding that this application must maintain its appearance for hours or even days after her death, when Roman officials and Egyptian subjects will view her body and form their final impressions of her reign. The colors you select emphasize her identification with the goddess Isis, while ensuring that her features retain their natural beauty rather than appearing artificially enhanced. The choice of jewelry for her final appearance requires balancing symbolic significance with practical considerations related to the preservation and display of her body after death. She selects pieces that reinforce her status as both pharaoh and goddess, while avoiding items so valuable that they might tempt grave robbers or Roman officials to disturb her remains. The serpent-themed pieces that have always been prominent in her collection receive special emphasis, creating visual connections between her mortal death and her spiritual transformation into a divine entity who transcends earthly political defeats. The final arrangement of her clothing follows similar principles, with garments selected to reinforce her identification with Egyptian religious imagery, while ensuring that her appearance in death conveys majesty rather than defeat. The fabrics and colors evoke the traditional artistic representations of Isis and other Egyptian goddesses, while the cut and styling demonstrate the sophisticated fashion sense that has always distinguished her from other contemporary rulers. You assist in the precise placement of every fold and drape, understanding that these details will influence how history remembers not only her death, but her entire reign as the afternoon advances toward evening and the sounds of Roman forces entering the city become clearly audible even within the protected confines of the palace. The Queen's final conversations reveal both her acceptance of approaching death and her continued concern for the welfare of those who have served her faithfully. She dismisses most of the remaining palace staff with generous gifts and careful instructions for avoiding the attention of the occupying forces, but she asks you and a small number of her most trusted servants to remain with her through the final hours to ensure that her death proceeds according to her carefully planned scenario. The Roman systematic search of the palace complex reveals the extent of their preparation for administering conquered Egypt, as teams of specialists examine everything from financial records to religious artifacts in their efforts to understand the administrative and cultural systems they have inherited. You observe clerks and translators working to decipher Egyptian hieroglyphic inscriptions and Greek administrative documents, attempting to reconstruct the governmental structures that will need to be adapted or replaced under Roman rule. Their methodical approach to this investigation suggests that Octavian's forces have carefully planned for the transition from independent kingdom to imperial province, with detailed procedures for managing everything from tax collection to religious ceremonies. The treatment of the Queen's serpent collection provides unexpected insight into Roman attitudes toward the cultural and religious traditions they are absorbing through conquest. Military officers who initially approached these creatures with obvious fear and disgust gradually develop more respectful attitudes as Egyptian priests explain their significance in pharaonic symbolism and religious practice. The decision to preserve rather than destroy these living symbols suggests a sophisticated understanding of the political advantages that come from demonstrating respect for local traditions, even when those traditions are associated with defeated enemies. The arrival of Octavian himself, announced by trumpet fanfares that echo through the marble corridors with brazen authority, transforms the palace from a crime scene into a stage for political theater designed to establish the legitimacy of Roman rule over Egypt. The future emperor's entrance into the death chamber is carefully choreographed to project appropriate solemnity and respect for his defeated opponent, while reinforcing his own authority as the representative of Roman civilization. His examination of the queen's body proceeds with the measured pace of someone who understands that his reactions will be reported throughout the empire and interpreted as indicators of his character and fitness for supreme power. Octavian's private conversations with his advisors, conducted in the adjacent chambers while guards maintain security around the death scene, revealed the complex calculations that would determine Roman policy toward the former Ptolemaic territories and their inhabitants. He expresses genuine admiration for the queen's intelligence and political skills while acknowledging the relief that her death provides by eliminating a potential focus for Egyptian resistance to Roman rule. His discussions of funeral arrangements and the treatment of her surviving associates demonstrate both political pragmatism and a sophisticated understanding of the propaganda value that comes from displaying magnanimity toward defeated enemies. The logistical challenges of preserving and displaying the queen's body in ways that serve Roman political objectives while respecting Egyptian cultural sensibilities create opportunities for those servants who possess specialized knowledge of embalming and funeral practices. Your understanding of the queen's personal preferences regarding her posthumous appearance, combined with your knowledge of Egyptian religious requirements, makes you valuable to Roman officials who need to balance political necessity with cultural sensitivity. This unexpected usefulness provides protection and leverage during a period when most former palace servants face uncertain futures under the new regime. The Roman decision to permit a state funeral for Cleopatra reflects Octavian's understanding that displays of respect for local traditions can serve imperial interests, gated than heavy-handed suppression of cultural differences. The planning for this ceremony requires extensive consultation with Egyptian priests and former court officials, creating opportunities for subtle resistance and the preservation of information that might otherwise be lost during the transition to foreign rule. Your participation in these preparations allows you to influence how the queen's memory will be preserved while gathering intelligence about Roman intentions for the long-term administration of Egypt. The embalming process itself becomes a final act of service that transcends the personal relationship between mistress and servant to encompass broader questions about cultural continuity and historical preservation. Working alongside Egyptian morticians whose skills have been passed down through generations of pyramid builders and tomb decorators, you ensure that the queen's body receives treatment appropriate to her status as both pharaoh and goddess, while incorporating elements that will reinforce her identification with the divine powers that have protected Egypt throughout its long history. The application of specialized preservatives and the arrangement of burial goods follow ancient formulas that connect her death to the broader cycle of spiritual transformation that defines Egyptian religious belief. The construction of the queen's tomb proceeds according to architectural principles that blend Ptolemaic Greek influences with traditional Egyptian symbolism, creating a monument that will serve multiple audiences while preserving the essential elements of pharaonic burial practice. Roman engineers contribute structural expertise, while Egyptian craftsmen provide the decorative skills necessary for creating inscriptions and images that will communicate appropriate messages about the queen's character and achievements to future generations. Your knowledge of her personal preferences and symbolic associations guides the selection of decorative themes that accurately reflect her self-image while appealing to the cultural sensibilities of her subjects. In the weeks following the Roman occupation of Alexandria, as the immediate chaos of conquest settles into the methodical routines of imperial administration, you find yourself drawn repeatedly to the great library that has served as the intellectual heart of the Mediterranean world for over 3 centuries. The building itself survived to recent conflicts largely intact, but the sight of smoke-blackened walls and the acrid smell of burned papyrus that still lingers in certain chambers serves as a constant reminder of the knowledge that was lost during the chaotic final days of Ptolemaic rule. The Roman guards who now patrol the library's corridors view you with a mixture of suspicion and indifference that they apply to all former palace servants, for your reputation as someone with specialized knowledge of Egyptian texts and languages has earned you limited access to areas where scholars are attempting to catalog and preserve what remains of the ancient world's greatest collection of written knowledge. The process of examining damaged manuscripts becomes a form of archaeological investigation that reveals layers of historical information extending far beyond the immediate circumstances of their destruction. Papyrus scrolls that were only partially consumed by fire retain fragments of text that can be deciphered through careful examination and patient reconstruction, while documents that were damaged by water used to fight the flames present different challenges requiring specialized techniques for separating stuck-together layers and recovering readable passages. Your work in this area develops from casual assistance to systematic involvement as Roman administrators recognize the value of your linguistic skills and your intimate familiarity with the organizational systems that the Ptolemaic court used for managing its private collections of rare and sensitive documents. The most intriguing discoveries emerged from scrolls and were deliberately hidden during the final days of the siege, concealed in wall cavities, buried beneath floor stones, or rolled inside the cases of other documents in attempts to preserve information that someone considered too valuable or too dangerous to risk discovery by conquering forces. These hidden caches revealed the existence of knowledge networks that operated parallel to the library's official scholarly activities. Informal systems for preserving and transmitting information about everything from military technologies to religious practices to the personal lives of rulers and their associates. Your exploration of these concealed materials provides insight into the intellectual and cultural currents that shaped Ptolemaic Egypt, while offering tantalizing glimpses of lost works by famous authors whose complete writings have not survived to the present day. The reconstruction of damaged texts requires collaborative efforts between scholars with different specializations, as fragments of individual works are often scattered across multiple locations within the library complex. A single scroll might have been torn apart during the chaos of the fire, with pieces used to kindle other fires or scattered by wind and human movement throughout the building. The patient work of matching handwriting styles, identifying recurring themes and references, and reconstructing logical sequences of argument often resembles solving elaborate puzzles where the solution reveals not only the content of specific documents, but also broader patterns of intellectual development and cultural exchange that characterize the Hellenistic world. Your involvement in these reconstruction efforts brings you into contact with Roman scholars and Greek intellectuals who have remained in Alexandria to continue their research under the new imperial administration. These men, representing the finest educational traditions of their respective cultures, approach the damaged library materials with a combination of scholarly curiosity and political caution, understanding that their work must serve Roman imperial interests while preserving the intellectual integrity that has made Alexandria famous throughout the civilized world. Their discussions reveal the complex negotiations required to maintain scholarly independence within a political system that views knowledge primarily as a tool for maintaining power and advancing imperial objectives. The most fascinating and disturbing discoveries involve documents that record experimental activities conducted by previous generations of Alexandrian scholars. Research projects that pushed the boundaries of contemporary knowledge in ways that anticipated modern scientific methods by many centuries. Among the partially burned scrolls, you discovered detailed records of anatomical studies based on human dissection, astronomical observations that challenged traditional geocentric models of the universe, and chemical experiments that explored the properties of various substances with systematic precision that would not be matched again until the Renaissance. These materials provide evidence of intellectual achievements that had been largely forgotten even before the Roman conquest, suggesting that the destruction of the library represents a catastrophic loss of human knowledge that extends far beyond the political and cultural changes associated with imperial expansion. The preservation techniques required for salvaging these damaged materials involve skills that combine traditional scholarly methods with practical craftsmanship that you develop through trial and error. The process of separating papyrus layers that have been fused together by water damage requires tools and techniques borrowed from other trades, including the fine brushes used by painters for detailed work and the chemical solutions employed by craftsmen for treating leather and textiles. The work proceeds slowly and carefully, since aggressive attempts to separate stuck materials often result in the complete destruction of texts that might otherwise yield readable fragments. The most delicate operations involve scrolls that were partially burned while tightly rolled, creating conditions where the outer layers protected inner sections from complete destruction while making access to the preserved material extremely difficult. These documents must be unrolled with infinite patience, often working with sections no larger than a fingernail at a time, using heated tools to soften the papyrus fibers without causing additional damage. The process can take weeks or months for a single scroll, but the results sometimes include the recovery of complete passages from works that were thought to be entirely lost, making the effort worthwhile despite the enormous investment of time and specialized labor. The organization of recovered materials follows systems developed by successive generations of library scholars, but the Roman administrators have introduced modifications that reflect their priorities and methods for managing information. The traditional Greek and Egyptian cataloging systems, based on subject matter and authorial attribution, are supplemented by new categories that emphasize practical applications and political relevance. Works on military engineering receive priority attention, while texts dealing with philosophy or pure mathematics are relegated to lower priority unless they can be demonstrated to have immediate practical value for imperial administration or military operations. Your role in this organizational work expands beyond simple translation and transcription to include analysis and interpretation of materials, whose significance may not be immediately apparent to Roman administrators who lack deep familiarity with Egyptian cultural traditions and intellectual history. Documents that appear to discuss purely theoretical questions often contain practical information about everything from agricultural techniques to medical treatments to architectural methods, but recognizing these applications requires understanding the indirect and metaphorical ways that ancient authors often presented technical knowledge. Your ability to decode these hidden meanings makes you valuable to the Roman effort, while providing opportunities to ensure that important information receives appropriate preservation and study. The discovery of Queen Cleopatra's personal library, concealed within a specially constructed chamber adjacent to her private apartments, provides the most direct connection between your current work and your former service to the last pharaoh of Egypt. This collection, owned to most palace residents and carefully hidden from Roman investigators during the initial occupation, contains documents that reveal aspects of the queen's intellectual interests and political strategies that were concealed even from her closest advisors. The existence of this hidden library demonstrates the queen's understanding that knowledge represents a form of power that must be carefully guarded and strategically deployed, while the selection of materials preserved within it provides insight into the sources and methods she used for developing the policies that shaped her reign. The contents of the queen's private collection reflect the breadth of her intellectual curiosity and the sophistication of her approach to the challenges of ruling a kingdom caught between competing imperial powers. Medical texts describe treatments and procedures that she apparently used to maintain her legendary beauty and health, while works on toxicology provide detailed information about the poisons and antidotes that played important roles in her political and personal relationships. Astronomical treatises reveal her interest in using celestial observations for both practical navigation and symbolic purposes, while philosophical works demonstrate her engagement with questions about the nature of power, justice, and human happiness that occupied the finest minds of her generation. The most intriguing materials in this collection involve correspondence and comments that record the queen's interactions with scholars, philosophers, and scientists from throughout the Mediterranean world. These papers reveal the existence of intellectual networks that transcended political boundaries, formal systems of communication and collaboration that allowed researchers to share discoveries and exchange ideas despite the military conflicts and diplomatic tensions that divided their respective kingdoms. The queen's participation in these networks demonstrates her understanding that intellectual leadership could serve as a complement to political and military power, reinforcing Egypt's position as a center of civilization and learning. The preservation of the queen's private library requires special security measures that go beyond the normal procedures used for protecting valuable manuscripts, since the materials contained within it could provide ammunition for critics of Roman rule or inspiration for Egyptian resistance movements. Your knowledge of the collection's existence and contents makes you simultaneously valuable and dangerous to Roman administrators. It's creating a situation that requires careful navigation to ensure both your personal survival and the preservation of historically important materials. The balance between cooperation and concealment that characterizes your relationship with Roman authorities mirrors the broader challenges faced by all Egyptian intellectuals who must adapt to foreign rule, while preserving essential elements of their cultural identity. As your work with the damaged manuscripts progresses, you begin to uncover evidence of systematic efforts to conceal and preserve specific categories of information during the chaotic final days of Ptolemaic rule. These discoveries suggest that the apparent randomness of which documents survived the fires and which were destroyed actually reflects deliberate choices made by palace officials and library scholars who understood that certain types of knowledge would be particularly valuable or dangerous under Roman administration. The pattern of survival and destruction reveals sophisticated understanding of how imperial powers typically approach the intellectual resources of conquered territories, with efforts focused on preserving materials that could serve Roman interests, while concealing information that might be used to challenge imperial authority or support resistance movements. The most systematic concealment efforts appear to have focused on documents related to military technologies and engineering techniques that gave Egyptian forces advantages in specific types of combat or construction projects. Among the carefully hidden scrolls, you discovered detailed descriptions of siege engines that incorporate design innovations not found in contemporary Roman or Greek military manuals. Architectural plans for fortifications that use Egyptian geographical features to maximum defensive advantage, and naval technologies that reflect centuries of experience with Nile River navigation and Red Sea trade routes. These materials demonstrate that Egyptian military knowledge included elements that could have been valuable to Roman forces, but their concealment suggests that Egyptian officials preferred to let this information disappear rather than allow it to be used for further imperial expansion. The preservation of medical and scientific texts follows different patterns that reflect the universal value of knowledge about human health and natural phenomena. Documents describing surgical procedures, pharmaceutical preparations, and diagnostic techniques appear to have been saved whenever possible, regardless of their cultural origins or political implications. This approach suggests recognition that medical knowledge transcends political boundaries and that the preservation of information about treating disease and injury serves humanitarian purposes that justify the risks involved in concealing materials from conquering forces. Your work with these medical texts reveals the remarkable sophistication of Alexandrian physicians whose understanding of anatomy, pharmacology, and surgical technique anticipated many developments that would not reappear in European medicine until the medieval period. The chemical and alchemical texts present particular challenges for interpretation, since they often employ symbolic language and coded references that were designed to protect trade secrets and esoteric knowledge from unauthorized readers. The authors of these works frequently disguise practical information about metallurgy, glassmaking, and pharmaceutical preparation within discussions of philosophical and religious topics, creating documents that appear to deal with abstract, theoretical questions while actually containing detailed, technical instructions for producing specific substances and materials. Your growing expertise in decoding these hidden meanings makes you valuable to Roman administrators who recognize the potential military and economic applications of advanced chemical knowledge. But it also provides opportunities to conceal information that could be dangerous if it fell into the wrong hands. The discovery of astronomical and mathematical texts that challenge conventional understanding of the natural world creates additional complications for scholars working under Roman supervision. Some of these documents present evidence for heliocentric models of planetary motion that contradict the geocentric theories accepted by most contemporary authorities, while others describe mathematical techniques for calculating the size and distance of celestial bodies that produce results inconsistent with traditional cosmological beliefs. The preservation of these materials requires careful judgment about when unconventional ideas can be presented as interesting theoretical speculations and when they must be concealed to avoid conflict with religious and philosophical authorities who might view them as threats to established order. The reconstruction of the Queen's personal correspondence reveals the extent of her involvement in international scholarly networks that operated independently of official diplomatic channels. Letters exchange information about everything from new mathematical discoveries to innovative artistic techniques to philosophical developments that were reshaping intellectual discourse throughout the Mediterranean world. These communications demonstrate that Cleopatra maintained regular contact with leading thinkers and researchers in fields ranging from astronomy to medicine to engineering, suggesting that her political strategies were informed by access to the most advanced knowledge available in her time. The preservation of this correspondence provides insight into the intellectual foundations of her decision-making, while revealing the existence of informal knowledge-sharing systems that transcended political boundaries. The deeper you delve into the reconstruction of damaged manuscripts, the more you begin to recognize patterns of encoding, concealment that suggest the existence of systematic efforts to preserve dangerous knowledge in forms that would be unrecognizable to casual observers or hostile authorities. These discoveries reveal that Alexandrian scholars had developed sophisticated techniques for embedding sensitive information within seemingly innocent texts, creating multiple layers of meaning that allow important knowledge to survive even when the political conditions that originally protected it have been completely destroyed. Your growing expertise in recognizing and decoding these hidden messages transforms you from a simple translator and transcriber into something approaching a cryptanalyst, capable of extracting secrets that their original authors believed would remain concealed for generations. The most elaborate of these concealment systems involve mathematical and astronomical texts that that appeared to present purely theoretical discussions of geometric relationships and celestial mechanics, but actually contained detailed instructions for everything from architectural engineering to chemical procedures to military tactics. The authors of these works used numerical relationships and geometric patterns as a kind of code, embedding practical information within abstract mathematical demonstrations that would be comprehensible only to readers who possessed specific knowledge about how to interpret the symbolic language being employed. Your recognition of these encoding techniques emerges gradually through careful comparison of different texts that seem to reference similar mathematical principles but produce dramatically different practical applications when their hidden instructions are properly decoded. The process of learning to read these coded texts requires developing an understanding of the cultural and intellectual context in which they were created, since the symbolic references and metaphorical language employed by their authors assume familiarity with philosophical, religious, and scientific traditions that may no longer be widely understood. A passage that appears to discuss the movement of celestial bodies might actually contain instructions for mixing chemical compounds, while a geometric proof could conceal detailed architectural specifications for constructing defensive fortifications. The key to decoding these hidden meanings often lies in recognizing the specific cultural and intellectual traditions that provided the conceptual framework for the encoding system being used. Your work with Queen Cleopatra's personal correspondence reveals that she was not only aware of these encoding techniques, but had developed her own variations for protecting particularly sensitive information in her communications with allies and agents throughout the Mediterranean world. Her letters often employ multiple layers of concealment, with obvious coded references that would be apparent to moderately sophisticated readers, serving as distractions from deeper levels of hidden meaning that require specialized knowledge to decode. The discovery of the keys and reference materials she used for creating and interpreting these complex codes provides insight into the intellectual sophistication of her intelligence operations, while demonstrating the extent to which scholarship and espionage were integrated in the political culture of late Ptolemaic Egypt. The reconstruction of alchemical and medical texts reveals the existence of knowledge preservation networks that operated across cultural and political boundaries, maintaining communication and collaboration between researchers who shared common interests. Despite the military conflicts and diplomatic tensions that divided their respective societies, these networks appear to have developed their own specialized vocabularies and symbolic systems for communicating about discoveries and techniques that were considered too valuable or too dangerous to discuss openly. The gradual decoding of these specialized languages provides access to information about advanced chemical and medical procedures that were known to ancient practitioners, but had been lost to later generations due to the destruction of the texts and institutions that preserved them. The most remarkable discoveries involve documents that describe experimental procedures and observational techniques that anticipate scientific methods not formally developed until the Renaissance and early modern period. Among the partially burned scrolls, you uncovered detailed descriptions of controlled experiments designed to test the effectiveness of different medical treatments, systematic approaches to varying single factors while holding others constant to determine cause and effect relationships, and statistical methods for analyzing the results of repeated observations to identify reliable patterns and principles. These materials suggest that ancient Alexandrian scholars had developed sophisticated approaches to empirical research that were largely forgotten during the medieval period and had to be rediscovered by later generations of scientists. The preservation of these advanced methodological texts requires special care and attention, since they represent knowledge that could be valuable for Roman military and administrative purposes, while also constituting cultural treasures that transcend immediate political considerations. Your role in cataloging and copying these materials involves making careful judgments about which aspects of ancient scientific knowledge should be shared with Roman authorities and which should be concealed or preserved through unofficial channels for future generations of researchers. The balance between cooperation and resistance that characterizes these decisions reflects the broader challenges faced by all intellectuals who must navigate between serving new political masters and preserving the essential elements of their cultural heritage. The discovery of encoded astronomical texts that contain accurate calculations of planetary positions and eclipse predictions provides compelling evidence that ancient astronomers possessed mathematical and observational capabilities that exceeded what most contemporary scholars believed possible for pre-telescopic observers. These documents describe techniques for making precise measurements of celestial phenomena using carefully designed instruments and systematic observation protocols that anticipate many of the methods employed by later generations of astronomers. The preservation of this astronomical knowledge requires special attention to the political implications of accurate calendar calculations and eclipse predictions, since these capabilities have always been associated with claims to divine authority and political legitimacy. The recovery of engineering texts that describe advanced construction techniques and architectural principles reveals the existence of practical knowledge that could be valuable for Roman military and civilian projects, while also representing cultural achievements that reflect distinctively Egyptian approaches to solving technical problems. Documents describing methods for building in flood-prone areas, techniques for constructing foundations in shifting desert sands, and approaches to designing ventilation systems for underground spaces all demonstrate the sophisticated understanding of environmental factors that Egyptian engineers had developed through centuries of experience with local, geographical, and climatic conditions. The preservation of this technical knowledge creates opportunities for subtle influence over Roman construction projects while ensuring that valuable engineering traditions survive the transition to foreign rule. The most emotionally challenging aspect of this preservation work involves recognizing that many of the encoding and concealment techniques you are learning to decode were developed by scholars and officials who understood that they were living through the end of their civilization and wanted to ensure that their most important knowledge would survive for future generations to rediscover. The care and ingenuity with which these individuals created their hidden messages reflect both intellectual sophistication and profound cultural loyalty, demonstrating the extent to which the preservation of knowledge was viewed as a sacred responsibility that transcended immediate political and personal concerns. Your own participation in this preservation effort connects you to a tradition of cultural guardianship that extends back through generations of scholars who understood that civilizations may fall, but human knowledge can survive if properly protected and transmitted. The gradual recognition that the encoding techniques used in ancient texts were often based on shared cultural knowledge that is no longer widely available leads to systematic efforts to reconstruct the intellectual and cultural context necessary for understanding these hidden messages. This reconstruction work requires collaboration between scholars with expertise in different fields, since the decoding of scientific texts often depends on understanding religious and philosophical traditions, while the interpretation of historical documents may require knowledge of mathematical and astronomical principles. Your role in coordinating these collaborative efforts provides opportunities to ensure that the most valuable aspects of ancient knowledge are properly understood and preserved, while building relationships with scholars who share your commitment to cultural preservation. The memories that return to you most vividly during quiet moments in the library, as you work with documents that preserve only fragmentary traces of the grandeur that once defined Ptolemaic court life, are the great banquets that served as theaters for political maneuvering as elaborate and deadly as any military campaign. These occasions, which outsiders often dismissed as mere displays of wealth and excess, actually constituted sophisticated instruments of statecraft that allowed the queen and her advisors to evaluate allies, intimidate enemies, gather intelligence, and demonstrate Egypt's continued vitality to audiences throughout the Mediterranean world. Your participation in the preparation and service of these magnificent events provided insight into the psychological and political calculations that shaped every detail of their planning and execution, revealing how luxury itself could serve as both weapon and shield in the dangerous game of international diplomacy. The planning for each major banquet began weeks or even months in advance, with decisions about guest lists, menu selections, entertainment programs, and decorative themes requiring careful consideration of the current political situation and the specific objectives the queen hoped to achieve through the gathering. The selection of guests alone involved complex calculations that balanced the need to honor important allies with opportunities to observe potential enemies, creating seating arrangements and conversation groupings that would facilitate the collection of intelligence while minimizing the risk of conflicts that could disrupt diplomatic relationships. Your role in these planning sessions expanded beyond simple service coordination to include providing observations about individual guests' personalities, preferences, and potential vulnerabilities that could be exploited for political advantage. The procurement of exotic foods and beverages for these events required coordination with trade networks that extended throughout the known world, creating opportunities for gathering information about political and economic conditions in distant kingdoms while demonstrating Egypt's continued access to luxury goods that other rulers might struggle to obtain. Spices from India, wines from distant Greek islands, coups, preserved fruits from Arabian oases, keys, and delicacies from African kingdoms all served both culinary and diplomatic purposes, with their presence at Egyptian banquets sending subtle messages about the reach and sophistication of Ptolemaic trade relationships. Your involvement in managing these procurement efforts provided exposure to the economic intelligence that informed the Queen's understanding of international political developments, while teaching you to recognize the connections between commercial relationships and military capabilities. The most extraordinary banquets featured foods and beverages that incorporated actual gold leaf and crushed gemstones, creating consumption experiences that literally allow guests to eat wealth while demonstrating the extent of Egyptian resources available for such displays. The preparation of these gilded delicacies required specialized techniques that transformed cooking into a form of alchemical artistry, with chefs who understood how to incorporate precious materials into foods without compromising their palatability or safety. Your assistance in these preparations involved learning to handle substances whose value exceeded the annual incomes of entire villages. Understanding that every grain of gold, dust, and fragment of crushed pearl represented not only monetary wealth, but also symbolic statements about the divine status of the rulers who could afford such extravagance. The psychological effects of consuming gold and gemstones created subtle alterations in guests' behavior and decision-making that the Queen learned to exploit for diplomatic advantage. The knowledge that one was literally eating wealth worth more than most people would see in their lifetimes produced a form of intoxication that combined physical satisfaction with awe and intimidation, making guests more susceptible to influence while reinforcing their understanding of Egyptian power and sophistication. The Queen's careful observation of how different individuals responded to these experiences formed her strategies for subsequent negotiations and interactions, with detailed mental notes about which guests seemed impressed, which appeared uncomfortable, and which maintained their composure despite the overwhelming display of wealth. The wine selections for major banquets required expertise that combined knowledge of viticulture with understanding of regional politics and cultural symbolism, since the choice of specific vintages and origins could communicate complex messages about Egyptian relationships with different kingdoms and trade partners. The Queen's personal wine collection included rare vintages from throughout the Mediterranean world, many acquired through diplomatic gifts or special trading. arrangements that reflected political alliances and cultural exchanges. Your education in wine service involved learning to recognize the subtle differences between productions from different regions and years, understanding how environmental factors affected flavor profiles, and appreciating the cultural significance that different wines carried for guests from various backgrounds. The most prized wines in the collection were those associated with significant historical events or famous personalities, creating opportunities for storytelling and cultural education that enhanced the entertainment value of banquets, while reinforcing messages about Egyptian connections to the broader Mediterranean world. A wine that had been present at the Battle of Actium, a vintage from Alexander's favorite vineyard, or bottles that had been aged in caves used by famous philosophers, all carried narrative potential that skilled hosts could exploit to create memorable experiences for their guests. Your role in presenting these wines included learning the stories and cultural associations that gave them special significance, developing the storytelling skills necessary for enhancing their impact on different audiences, the incorporation of African and Arabian beverages into banquet offerings provided opportunities to demonstrate Egyptian connections to trade networks that extended far beyond the Mediterranean world, while also introducing guests to flavor experiences that were unavailable in their home kingdoms. Fermented drinks made from exotic fruits, spiced beverages that incorporated rare herbs and aromatics, and ceremonial preparations that followed ancient recipes all served to reinforce Egypt's position as a crossroads of world trade and cultural exchange. The preparation and service of these exotic beverages required specialized knowledge about their cultural significance and proper presentation methods, since inappropriate handling could offend guests or miss opportunities to create maximum impact. The entertainment programs that accompanied major banquets were designed to showcase Egyptian cultural sophistication while providing subtle opportunities for political messaging and intelligence gathering. Musical performances that featured instruments and compositions from throughout the Mediterranean world demonstrated the cosmopolitan character of Ptolemaic court culture, while dance presentations that incorporated traditional Egyptian movements with contemporary international styles reinforced messages about cultural continuity and adaptation. Your involvement in coordinating these entertainment programs required understanding the political and cultural sensitivities of different guest groups, ensuring that performances would enhance rather than detract from the diplomatic objectives of each gathering. The most treacherous banquets were those designed specifically to identify and exploit the weaknesses of guests whose loyalty to Egypt remained questionable. Elaborate psychological operations that transformed hospitality into interrogation, while maintaining the social pleasantries that prevented targets from recognizing the true nature of their participation. These events required months of careful planning and preparation, with guest lists selected to create specific social dynamics and conversation opportunities. Entertainment programs designed to lower psychological defenses and serving protocols that provided maximum opportunity for observation and analysis of target behavior. Your role in these operations evolved beyond simple service coordination to include active participation in psychological manipulation, techniques that made you complicit in activities that often determined whether specific individuals would survive. The political upheavals that were reshaping the Mediterranean world. The selection of wines and foods for these targeted banquets involved considerations that went far beyond simple hospitality to include understanding of how different substances affected human judgment and emotional control. Certain wine combinations were known to make guests more talkative and less cautious in their conversations, while specific food preparations could produce subtle alterations in mood and decision-making that experienced observers could detect and exploit. Your education in these specialized aspects of banquet preparation required learning to recognize the physical and psychological signs that indicated when guests had reached optimal states of vulnerability, understanding how environmental factors, like lighting and music, could enhance the effects of carefully selected consumables, and developing the timing skills necessary for introducing specific conversational topics when targets were most likely to reveal useful information. The most sophisticated of these operations involved the use of trained courtesans and entertainers who possessed specialized skills in extracting information from male guests through combinations of flattery, alcohol, and carefully orchestrated seduction. These women, many of whom were accomplished intellectuals and artists in their own right, understood how to create atmospheres of intimacy and trust that encouraged normally cautious men to share information about their political loyalties, military capabilities, and personal vulnerabilities. Your coordination with these specialists required understanding the complex social and psychological dynamics that governed their interactions with targets, ensuring that their efforts were supported by appropriate environmental conditions and that the information they gathered was properly documented and analyzed. The psychological profiling techniques employed during these operations anticipated many of the methods that would not be formally developed until centuries later, involving systematic observation and analysis of individual behavior patterns to identify specific vulnerabilities and predict likely responses to different types of pressure and persuasion. The queen personally trained selected servants in these observation techniques, teaching them to recognize subtle indicators of deception, fear, ambition, and other emotional states that could be exploited for intelligence gathering or political manipulation. Your training in these methods included learning to read facial expressions, body language, and vocal patterns with scientific precision, developing memory techniques for retaining complex behavioral observations, and understanding how to coordinate your observations with those of other servants to create comprehensive psychological profiles of important targets. The final great banquet of Cleopatra's reign, held just weeks before the arrival of Octavian's forces in Alexandria, stands in your memory as both the culmination of Ptolemaic magnificence and a haunting preview of the civilizations approaching end. This extraordinary event, which the queen conceived as a final demonstration of Egyptian wealth and sophistication for her remaining allies and uncertain subjects, required months of preparation, despite the deteriorating political situation that made such displays seem almost surreal in their defiance of obvious reality. Your role in organizing this last magnificent gathering involved coordinating resources and personnel who understood that they were participating in what might be their final opportunity to showcase the cultural achievements and artistic sophistication that had distinguished Ptolemaic Egypt for 3 centuries. The guest list for this culminating banquet reflected the complex political calculations that shaped all of the queen's final decisions, balancing the need to honor loyal supporters with strategic attempts to influence wavering allies and even to demonstrate Egyptian continued vitality to potential enemies who might be observing the kingdom's last days. The invitations extended to Roman sympathizers and Egyptian nobles whose loyalty remained questionable created opportunities for final intelligence gathering operations while serving as vehicles for subtle propaganda. Messages about the benefits of continued resistance to imperial occupation. Your involvement in managing the delicate social dynamics created by these diverse political loyalties required all of the diplomatic and psychological skills you had developed through years of service in the palace's most sensitive operations. Procurement of ingredients and materials for this final banquet required extraordinary efforts that demonstrated both the continued reach of Egyptian trade networks and the mounting difficulties created by Roman naval blockades and political pressure on foreign suppliers. The acquisition of exotic spices from India, rare wines from distant Greek islands, precious metals for decorative purposes, and specialized ingredients for elaborate culinary presentations, all required negotiations with traders and suppliers who understood that their transactions with Egypt might expose them to Roman retaliation. Your coordination of these procurement efforts involved managing relationships with merchants and craftsmen who balanced personal loyalty to Egypt with legitimate concerns about their own survival in a Mediterranean world increasingly dominated by Roman imperial power. The menu for this final celebration incorporated elements that consciously evoked the entire history of Ptolemaic rule, with dishes that represented culinary traditions from different periods of the dynasty's 3-century reign, and ingredients that symbolized Egypt's historical connections to trade, networks, and cultural influences that had shaped Mediterranean civilization. The preparation of foods that incorporated actual gold leaf and crushed gemstones reached new extremes of extravagance, with some dishes whose material value exceeded the annual revenues of small kingdoms. Your assistance in these elaborate culinary preparations involved working with chefs and artisans who understood that they were creating edible artworks that would be remembered long after the political circumstances that made them possible had disappeared into history. The entertainment program for this final banquet combined traditional Egyptian cultural presentations with contemporary artistic innovations that reflected the cosmopolitan character of late Ptolemaic civilization. Musical performances featured compositions that traced the evolution of court music from early Ptolemaic Greek influences through the gradual incorporation of native Egyptian elements to contemporary works that synthesized traditions from throughout the Mediterranean world. Dance presentations told stories that connected ancient Egyptian mythology to current political circumstances, while dramatic performances recreated historical events that reinforced messages about Egyptian cultural continuity and resistance to foreign domination. The most emotionally powerful element of the entertainment program was a specially commissioned artistic presentation that depicted the entire history of Ptolemaic Egypt through a series of tableaux that showed the dynasty's greatest achievements in scholarship, architecture, trade, and diplomacy. This historical pageant, performed by the finest artists available in Alexandria, served multiple purposes as entertainment, education, and propaganda, reminding guests of the cultural and political accomplishments that justified continued resistance to Roman occupation, while providing the queen with opportunities to deliver subtle political messages through the selection and presentation of specific historical episodes. The serving protocols for this final banquet achieved new levels of theatrical sophistication that transformed the simple act of food presentation into elaborate dramatic performances designed to create lasting impressions on guests who understood that they were witnessing the end of an era. The coordination of service personnel, the timing of course presentations, and the choreography of serving activities all followed scripts that had been developed specifically for this event, creating seamless sequences of visual and sensory experiences that reinforced the overall impact of the gathering. Your training in these specialized serving techniques required developing performance skills that went far beyond traditional service competencies to include acting, timing, and spatial coordination abilities that allowed you to participate effectively in what was essentially a form of political theater. The wine selections for this culminating banquet included some of the rarest and most historically significant bottles in the royal collection, with vintages that had been aged for decades, and wines that carried personal associations with the queen's relationships with Julius Caesar and Marcus Antonius. The presentation of these precious wines was accompanied by storytelling and historical commentary that enhanced their symbolic value while creating opportunities for the queen to share her personal reflections on the political and emotional experiences that had shaped her reign. Your role in presenting these wines required understanding their historical significance and emotional associations while maintaining the composure necessary for professional service during what was obviously a deeply personal and emotionally charged experience for the queen. The psychological atmosphere that developed during this final banquet reflected the complex emotions of participants who understood that they were simultaneously celebrating Egyptian achievements and mourning the approaching end of Egyptian independence. The conversations that took place among guests revealed a mixture of defiance, nostalgia, fear, and determination that created unique opportunities for observation and analysis of how different individuals coped with the stress of living through momentous historical changes. Your monitoring of these conversations provided final insights into the thoughts and concerns of Egyptian nobles and foreign allies whose future actions would influence the transition to Roman rule and the survival of Egyptian cultural traditions under foreign occupation. As you settle into the quiet rhythms of your new existence under Roman rule, working among the damaged scrolls and recovering fragments of a civilization that has passed into history, the memories of your service to the last pharaoh of Egypt take on a weight and significance that extends far beyond personal nostalgia. These recollections, preserved in the intimate details that only someone who lived within the innermost circles of power could possess, represent a form of historical testimony that no written document can replicate. The texture of silk against royal skin, the precise temperature of oils warmed for morning ceremonies, the subtle changes in the queen's breathing when she contemplated decisions that would affect millions of lives. These sensory memories constitute a kind of knowledge that transforms abstract historical events into human experiences that pulse with life and meaning. The contrast between the world you once knew and the reality you now inhabit serves as a constant reminder of how quickly even the most established civilizations can be transformed by forces beyond their control. The marble corridors that once echoed with the footsteps of scholars and diplomats from throughout the known world now resonate with the measured tread of Roman soldiers whose presence represents a fundamental shift in the cultural and political order that had defined the Mediterranean world for centuries. Yet, within this transformation, you have discovered opportunities for preservation and resistance that operate beneath the surface of official compliance, creating spaces where essential elements of Egyptian tradition can survive and adapt to new circumstances. The skills you developed during your years of intimate service to Queen Cleopatra, the ability to read subtle signs and hidden meanings, to navigate complex social and political relationships, to maintain discretion while gathering and preserving vital information, have proven invaluable for your current work of cultural preservation and historical documentation. The same attention to detail that allowed you to anticipate the Queen's needs and respond to her unspoken concerns now enables you to recognize the significance of damaged texts and fragmentary evidence that might escape the notice of less experienced observers. The psychological resilience that sustained you through the dangerous final months of Ptolemaic rule continues to provide strength for the patient, methodical work of reconstruction and preservation that defines your new existence. The knowledge you carry within your memory represents a treasure that is perhaps more valuable than any of the gold or jewels that were scattered during the conquest of Alexandria. Your intimate understanding of how one of history's most remarkable women approached the challenges of ruling a kingdom caught between competing imperial powers. Your first-hand observations of the decision-making processes that shaped crucial historical events, and your detailed knowledge of the daily life and cultural practices that defined late Ptolemaic civilization constitute historical resources that cannot be replaced or reconstructed through any other means. The responsibility for preserving and somehow transmitting this knowledge has become a sacred obligation that gives meaning and purpose to your survival. The evolution of your role from personal servant to cultural guardian reflects broader patterns of adaptation and survival that characterize the experiences of all individuals who live through periods of fundamental historical change. Skills that once served the needs of a specific royal household have been transformed into capabilities that serve the broader cause of preserving human knowledge and cultural memory for future generations. The loyalty that was once focused on protecting and serving a particular individual has expanded into a commitment to safeguarding the intellectual and cultural achievements of an entire civilization. The relationships you have developed with Scholars and intellectuals who share your commitment to preservation work have created new forms of community and purpose that provide alternatives to the traditional social structures that were destroyed by Roman conquest. These collaborative efforts to recover, interpret, and protect valuable knowledge represent forms of resistance that operate through cultural rather than military means, ensuring that essential elements of Egyptian civilization will survive, even if political independence cannot be restored. The networks of trust and mutual support that sustain this preservation work demonstrate that human connections and shared values can transcend the political boundaries imposed by imperial power. As you drift towards sleep in quarters that are comfortable but modest compared to the luxurious chambers where you once served a queen, your mind returns to the sensory memories that have become more precious than any material possession. The scent of frankincense and myrrh that filled the palace during religious ceremonies, the soft whisper of silk against marble floors, the hypnotic movements of serpents whose presence connected mortal rulers to divine powers. These remembered experiences create a bridge between past and present that allows the spirit of Ptolemaic Egypt survive within your consciousness, even as its political reality has been erased from the Mediterranean world. The gentle sounds of contemporary Alexandria Roman voices in Latin discussing administrative matters, the clanking of military equipment as guards change shifts, the shuffling of scrolls and documents as scholars work to rebuild the library's collections, create a soundscape that is both familiar and foreign, reminding you that you exist in a world that has been fundamentally transformed while maintaining enough continuity to preserve hope for the future. The work continues. The preservation efforts advance, and the precious memories of a remarkable woman and a vanished civilization remain alive within the quiet sanctuary of your thoughts, waiting for the right moment and the appropriate audience to emerge once again into the light of historical consciousness. Rest now, knowing that your service to one of history's most extraordinary figures has evolved into a form of cultural stewardship that ensures her memory and the civilization she's represented will survive for future generations to discover and appreciate. In the shadows between memory and documentation, between personal loyalty and historical responsibility, between the past's magnificence and the present's possibilities, you continue to serve purposes larger than any individual life, carrying forward the flame of human achievement through the long darkness that separates one age from another.